Chapter 2, Professor G. Narke. Professor G. Narke, M.A.C.A.L., M.Sc., Manch. Professor of Geology and Chemistry in College of Engineering, Deccan Gymkhana, age 53, Brahmin, Pune. 10th, 20th, 25th, 28th May 1936. Experiences with saints and progress in one's spiritual affairs cannot be revealed. According to the hackneyed saying of Kabir, "Jinne paya unne chupaya," what one has got he keeps secret. This has been the strict injunction of my teacher, Sri Sai Baba. The mouth instinctively closes when I try to mention my experiences. I can and may give some superficial account of occurrences and things concerning Sai Baba. These are well known and no rule of secrecy is violated thereby. But they are chaff and hardly worth any trouble to write or talk about. Yet, as you are keen after any bit of information, I shall mention some of such facts. Of course, the deepest experience one has is incapable of utterance, apart from any question of rules of secrecy. In the first place, you see, I have placed Sai Baba amongst the household gods we worship daily at home. Sai Baba is God, not an ordinary Satpurusha. The divine gleam in Sai's eyes denotes that he is the Satpurusha. His powers and actions were wonderful. I will give a chronological account of my spiritual learnings and how I came in contact with Sai Baba. My early surroundings promoted faith in Sai Baba. My father-in-law, Mr. Booty, my wife, and my mother were all great devotees of Sai Baba and worshipped him as God. I used to read Gnaneshwari and other works which deal with greatness of Satpurushas. In 1907 to 09, I was at Calcutta and was trained in geological survey and as a scholar from CP. I had got my MA in 1905. I was sent in 1909 as State Scholar of Government of India to Manchester, where I stayed till 1912 and got my MSc in Geology and Mining. I came back in August 1912. My wife, mother, and my father-in-law were often at Shirdi, and they wrote to me to go over to Shirdi to pay my respects to Sai Baba. I wrote back to say that I would go if Baba wanted me. My father-in-law then asked Baba and wrote to me that Baba wanted me. So I went to Shirdi in April 1913. Baba was very kind to my relations. He would jump up occasionally and play a jig, as it were, before my mother, showing how happy he was to see my mother. Mr. Madhav Rao Deshpande went with me and introduced me for the first time to Sai Baba. Baba replied, "You introduce him to me. I have known him for 30 generations. What wonderful knowledge of the past was this." The impression I got of Sai Baba was from his eyes. They pierced me through and through, and his image as seated at the chowdi has left an indelible impression on my heart. As for the inner experiences, they gradually grew upon. First, I fell in with the current and did my seva to Baba and attended the aartis, etc. At an aarti in early visit, Sai Baba was in a towering passion. He fumed, cursed, and threatened for no visible cause. I doubted if he was a madman. That was a passing thought. The aarti was completed in the usual way. In the afternoon of that day, I went and massaged his feet and legs. Then he stroked my head and said, "I am not mad." Lo, he, seeing my heart, nothing is concealed from him. He is my Antaryami, the inner soul of my soul, I thought. Thenceforward, numerous instances occurred in my own experience of his Antaryamitva. When he talked, he spoke as one seated in my heart, knowing all its thoughts, all its wishes, etc. This is God within. I had no hesitation in deciding that he was God. I tested him at times. Each test produced the same conviction that he was all knowing, all seeing, and able to mold all things to his will. A few instances of hundreds may be cited here which showed that nothing was beyond him or concealed from him in the past, present, and future. In 1913, Baba told me that my father-in-law would build a Dagdi Vada, that is a stone edifice, at Shirdi, and that I would be in charge of it. It was only in 1915-16 that my father-in-law began to build it, the building in which Baba's tomb is erected. And it was after 1918-19 I was one of the trustees in charge of that tomb. My mother was anxious about my employment. I was ever tossing from place to place and often had periods of unemployment. I was trained in England as a geologist, mining engineer, and here in India I was on the lookout for prospecting jobs advertised in the press and took up one job after finishing another, each in a short time. My stay at Shirdi was only for 3 or 4 days, and then I went back to Balaghat and Burma. After 3 months, my work under BOC ceased and I went back to Nagpur and thence to Shirdi and stayed 4 months there with my wife and went back to Nagpur. Again, as I got a letter from Madhav Rao that Baba wanted me, I went to Shirdi alone and stayed 13 months. I was without employment and I did not care. Sometimes I had stray fancies that a fakir's life was good for me. It was a day in 1914. Baba had got ready a number of kafnis, somewhat like gowns or togas, which are worn by fakirs, and presented a number of people with them. I was watching the distribution from a distance and hoped that one might be conferred on me to be kept with me and worn on special occasions, example bhajans in honor of Sai Baba. Baba stopped distribution even when many kafnis still remained with him. He beckoned to me a little later and placing his hand kindly on my head, stroked it and said, "Do not blame me for not giving you a kafni. That fakir has not permitted me to give you one." My relations were asking Baba what was to become of me, seeing that I had such an unsettled course of life. My mother also saw that I went up to distant places like Calcutta and Burma for prospecting jobs and prayed to Baba that I should be provided by His grace with good employment nearer home or Shirdi. Baba answered and told them, "I will settle him at Pune." I got sometimes a number of jobs at the same time and I had to choose. I went to Baba each time, relying wholly on his foresight and all-seeing wisdom to guide me. I had a great reliance on him as a suckling baby on its mother. His choice was oftentimes strange. When there was once a choice between Calcutta and Burma, he chose the latter. He always would say, "Go to Burma and Pune," or "Go to such and such a place and Pune," adding Pune every time he made the selection. In 1916, I had to choose between an offer from Banaras of a professorship and a prospecting job at Burma. Baba told me, "Go to Burma and Pune." I always laughed within myself at the addition of Pune as I was a mining engineer and Pune held no prospects for me. Even in 1913, Baba was seeing my present permanent appointment as Professor of Geology and Chemistry in Pune, which I had held since 1918. The entire future of my career was but present to him. After 1916, I returned to Shirdi after a long spell of absence. I inquired as soon as I arrived who were doing what service to Baba. I was told Vaman Rao Patel, BALLB, was doing the service of begging food in the village on behalf of Baba, and I felt a bit jealous. If that is so, why should I not be given that work? I thought to myself, but said nothing. It was then darshan time, and I had no time to undress. I went in my full suit, boot, trousers, coat, and hat to Baba's masjid. Baba was being asked 3 times permission to send Vaman Rao with begging bowl. Suddenly he pointed to me and said, "Let this man go and beg for food with that bowl today." I went in full suit that day and begged. Later, for 3 months, I went begging at noon for Baba's sake. That is, for food for Baba in my ordinary costume. People could not understand why I was chosen for this office. But since I had that desire, Baba, as my innermost soul, my Antaryami, noticed it and gave me the opportunity of serving him in that way. This honor of begging for food on his behalf at noon time was reserved by Baba for very few. It was in 1917 that the announcement was made that a professor of geology for the College of Engineering at Pune was wanted. I asked Baba if I should apply for the post. He said yes. I went to Pune to see all people concerned. It was a hard and uphill work, as the applicants for the post were many and were supported by various influential persons. After I left Shirdi, Baba inquired of the men there, "Where is Narke gone?" They told him he has gone to Pune to try for the appointment. "Allah will bless," was Baba's remark. He then asked whether I had any children and was informed that several were born but none survived. They died after a very short life. "Allah will bless," was again his remark. I secured the appointment in 1918 and was made permanent in 1919. And the children born to me since then are not short lived. I have 4 sons now. All these are evidently secured by Baba's grace. So much can be easily said of Sai Baba by all, mere observers from outside. But he who judged of Baba by the outside alone would be greatly mistaken in his estimate. Baba was, of course, adapting himself to the capacity of people that resorted to him for help and protection. Most of them were superficial people, seeking mostly some material gain or advantage, and to them he did not reveal his inner nature. But when anyone capable of diving deeper came to him, he revealed more of himself and his powers. I was keenly observing him from the first, and he noticed it and encouraged my habit of observing and judging, complimenting me as Hoshiar or clever. On occasions, he told me what a dubya, that is, sluggard, you are, evidently referring to my failure to penetrate beneath the surface of these things on those occasions. Baba was not the man to stifle legitimate inquiry. Everything he did or said was full of significance. Mostly I could understand them. To one deeply observing him, the startling fact came out into greater and greater prominence that Baba was living and operating in other worlds also, besides this world, in an invisible body. Remarks made by him openly would be treated as meaningless ranting by those who did not know him. His language also was highly cryptic, full of symbology, parable, allegory, and metaphor. Literal interpretations of them would be made by superficial people who would then conclude that Baba was a worldly man amongst worldly men and a very avaricious man at that. For instance, a man came to Baba and watched him for a time, and I asked him what impression he formed of Baba. His answer was, I never saw any saint talking of money all the hours of the day, and he felt disappointed. This man did not know that paisa, money, was used by Baba to denote punya, apurva, or merit very often. But on a careful observation and analysis of his talks, one must conclude that his nature, powers, and functions were very great, and that the way in which people would benefit by his guidance and help would be peculiar. In 1914 or thereabouts, a rich old gentleman of Harda came with a lady to Shirdi. He was suffering from TB, that is, consumption. During the space of 1 month, there was noticeable improvement in his health, so he made Shirdi his residence. At the end of the second month, he grew worse and his end seemed to be approaching. One day, the ladies of his house and their friends told me that his condition was critical and there was no senior male to go and ask Baba for help, and sent him to ask Baba for his Udi. I went up. Baba told me that the man would be better for quitting this earth. What can this Udi do? Anyhow, take the Udi and give it as it is wanted. So I took and gave the Udi, but of course refrained from intimating Baba's words to anyone. The condition grew worse. Then Shama, that is Madhavrao Deshpande, arrived and went to Baba and told him of the imminent death. Baba appears to have said, how can he die? In the morning he will come to life. This was taken to mean that the old man would not quit the earth. So they placed lamps all round the corpse and waited till noon. Life was not restored to the corpse. Funeral ceremonies followed. The Harda gentleman's relations thought that Baba had given false hopes and went away from Shirdi. Then one day, a relative of the deceased saw Baba in a dream with the deceased's head over his own, that is Baba's, and Baba disclosed the lungs in a rotten state and said, from the torture of all this, I have saved him. Thereafter, he and his relations renewed their visits to Shirdi. Baba's words, how can he die? He will come to life, evidently referred to survival of human personality and taking up new forms of life. Baba was frequently talking of his travels with an invisible body across great distances of space and time. In the morning, sitting near his dhuni with several devotees, he would say to what distant place he went overnight and what he had done. Those who had slept by his side the whole night at the masjid or chawdi knew that his physical body was at Shirdi all the night. But his statements were literally true and were occasionally verified and found to be true. He had travelled to distant places in an invisible, that is, spirit form, and rendered help there. Again, he would frequently talk of post mortem experiences. A Shirdi Marwadi's boy fell ill and died. People returned from the funeral to the masjid with gloomy faces. Sai Baba then said to that boy, he must be nearing the river now, just crossing it. I felt that the reference could only be to Vaitarani. He told several people of the past lives and the events therein. He told me the facts of 4 previous lives of mine. He spoke of this in the presence of others, but others did not and could not understand that it referred to me. He had the peculiar art of giving information to particular individuals in the midst of a group, in a way that they alone could understand and not the other members of the group. Strangely enough, at one sitting, by a few acts, words, etc., he could and did benefit numerous persons. This power to travel in invisible body to distant parts of this world, to traverse other realms than the earth life and note or control what takes place there, and to see the past and future alike, revealed one great fact about his nature. Some of his own observations also brought that out clearly. Sai Baba occasionally asked, I heard it myself, where are you? Where am I? Where is the world? Occasionally he declared, pointing to his body or touching it and referring to it as, This is my house. I am not here. My Guru Murshid has taken me away. As even in the flesh, in this earth life, he was not confined to his physical body. It may be truly said of him, Sai Baba is alive. He is where he was then. Even then, he was where he is now. He also made occasional reference to what his function is and was in the terrestrial sphere and other worlds. He several times referred to his control of destinies of departed souls, indicating thereby his function in the cosmic order. Sai Baba never spoke untruth, never spoke meaningless jargon, but only those who were familiar with his ways could make out the meaning of what he said or did when they were intended for their understanding. Upadesha, Mantra, Tantra, etc. Sai Baba never gave me any mantra, tantra, or upadesha, and so far as I know, he gave these to none. Madhav Rao Deshpande had told me of the following incident. Radhabai Deshmukh was at Shirdi waiting for a time on Baba, and she wanted upadesha. Finding that he gave her none, she started satyagraha. She stopped taking food and was determined to be without food until Sai Baba should give her upadesha. On the fourth day of the fast, Madhav Rao, taking pity on her condition, went and told Sai Baba of it and requested him to pronounce the name of some god so that she might take it as her mantropadesha for japa. Baba then sent for her and told her that giving Upadesha was not his line, that he following his Guru had different traditions, that his Guru was so powerful that he trembled to go and stand before him, and that the help given by the Guru was invisible and secret and not by oral instruction. Mi kanala isnara Guru nave, amacha dharani nirala ahe. I do not instruct through the year. Our traditions are different, was what he said. Sai Baba never lectured nor discoursed systematically as others do. He gave hints, very pregnant hints. A word or a sentence or two at a time was all he cared to utter. But from them, an observant devotee could build up his own system, lecture, or philosophy. It is difficult, therefore, to be dogmatic if one is asked what are Sai Baba's aims, methods, etc. But stray hints were forthcoming. Aim in life or Purushartha. Did Sai Baba ask people to aim at moksha? Did he advocate Viveka and Vairagya? Never have I heard that from his lips. Reaching God is the aim. That was the way he put it. Allah milnara sapta samudra nihala karna. That is, reaching God, crossing or traversing all the oceans and worlds. Beda par karna. Getting beyond chains or limits. He never, so far as I know, spoke of Maya, or the theory that all existence in the sublunary sphere is mere illusion, to my knowledge. He took the common sense view that this world and the worlds beyond are real and that we have to make the best of them here and hereafter. Karma and reincarnation. These were frequently referred to by him. We must sow good results in this life and the next was the truth that underlay many of the stories he told. He frequently referred to past lives of others and occasionally referred to the future lives of some. No one moving with him could have even a momentary doubt about post-mortem existence and the existence of the other worlds than this, wherein rewards and punishments for acts done here would be reaped. These are Hindu doctrines and beliefs. Coming to the question of Baba's Hinduism or other religion, Baba never declared, so far as I know, whether he belonged to any religion, caste, creed, etc. He was above all, but he has mentioned and done several things showing his relation to Hinduism. I have heard Sai Baba say, Majha Guru Brahman ahe, that is, my Guru is a Brahmin. Baba's attitude to Hinduism and Brahmins. Baba had a great regard for the Bhagavad Gita, Bhavartha Ramayana, Eknath Bhagavat, Panchadashi, Yoga Vasishtha, the Puranas, etc. His talks had reference to the contents of these often. When Jnanadeva's Arati was begun, he would sit up, fold his hands, joining his palms in front of his chest in token of reverence, and close his eyes. About Panchadashi, he said to Mr. Karpade, as I heard, "Ye to Amara Khajana hai." This is our treasury, that is, it contains whatever is valuable for our spiritual welfare. I know personally his reverence for Yoga Vasishtha. One day in early days, 1914, Baba asked me several times to give him dakshina, rupees 15. I had no money and he knew that fully well. So when I was alone with him, I said, Baba, you know I have no money, and why do you ask me for rupees 15 dakshina? Baba answered that he knew my impecunious condition well enough. But, he added, you are reading Yoga Vasishtha now. The part you are now reading is specially important. Get me rupees 15 dakshina from that. I was reading Yoga Vasishtha. Getting money out of it was deriving valuable lessons therefrom. And giving the money to Baba meant, of course, lodging the lessons in my heart, where he stayed as my Antaryami. I also know that he held Rama and Krishna in great reverence. Baba and Maharashtra Satpurushas. Baba had great reverence for saints like Jnaneshwar Tukaram. What were the aims and virtues needed for achieving them in Sai Baba's view, and what sadhanas did he favor? Of the four margas, 1. Yoga Marga. Regarding this as chiefly based on asana, pranayama, concentration, rousing the kundalini, and achieving higher powers thereby en route, Sai Baba did not care for these. These were not the steps he recommended to any so far as I know. On the other hand, he said, I know personally those who proceed by the method of pranayama must come to me ultimately for further progress. Number 2. Karma Marga. Baba set the example of living amidst society and laboring to produce goods. He ground grain into flour. He was not for ascetic desertion of society, nor for begging. Though he himself begged within limits prescribed by his Rananabandha perhaps, it was for a little food only, and when he demanded dakshina, that was for a number of reasons, chiefly clearing of Rananabandha. He wanted the general run of visitors to continue their grihastha lives and did not advocate sannyasa, that is, they should not renounce society or go to beg. He made me and Vaman Rao beg, not for ourselves but only for the Guru, as humble service to the Guru. Though Baba did not say so, I think he realized the evil of begging, that is indiscriminate begging, to be the loss of one's stored up merit, that is apurva. Sai Baba's demand for dakshina was explained by him when someone asked him why he asked for dakshina. Hello, do I ask dakshina of everyone? I demand only from those whom the fakir points out to me. He demanded only particular sums and would not accept anything more. None refused dakshina when he wanted it. Sometimes the demand had other meaning. Example, number 1, get away. Number 2, get into contact with X, Y, Z, etc. Number 3, Gnana Marga. If this is taken as something confined to inquiry into the self and an effort to understand the Upanishads and Brahma Sutras to get light on that inquiry, that was not Baba's method and aim. His wish was not expressed, but by his example, his devotees should infer that he wanted them to become like himself. His knowledge and experience were so far as I could see real and realistic. His awareness exceeded the bounds of our space and time, extended over all the worlds, and embraced the distant past and future as well as the present. He knew, therefore, what existence in any of the worlds and at any time had to offer for the soul's enjoyment, and with such knowledge he renounced all attachment. He was perfectly detached amidst numerous attractions. His life was therefore real Vairagya and real Nishkamya, karma which would lead one to God. Number 4, Bhakti Marga. This is, of course, the main plank of most saints, as it is of Sai Baba. Obeying, serving, and loving God are its chief features. The peculiar feature stressed by Sai's example and words is the vast importance of developing this devotion on the basis of devotion to one's Guru or teacher. It is seeing God in, through, and as the Guru, identifying the Guru with God. Baba's Guru. Of his Guru, hardly anything is known. I have heard him say, Majha Guru Brahman Ahe. That is, my Guru is a Brahmin. Baba held real Brahmins in high esteem. He has said Brahmins earn much pika, that is, punya, apurva, or merit. By their ways, a disciple is very different from a devotee. The Guru is connected by a close and intimate tie with and has every responsibility for the disciple. He has no such close tie with a devotee and is not bound to bear all his sins and sorrows. Sai Baba had no disciple. The disciple must serve his master to carry out all his wishes strictly and to the letter. As Sai said, I would tremble to come into the presence of my Guru. There was no one prepared to serve him in that way at Shirdi. It seems, he asked, to call himself my disciple. Who can serve me adequately and satisfactorily? But of devotees, Sai Baba had a large number. These he looked after, encouraged, and protected, and gave by example in occasional gestures, directions, etc., some instruction. Sai Baba's method of teaching, or rather improving the devotee who came to him, was not oral instruction. His moral tales and a few directions occasionally given were no doubt teaching through the year, but these were exceptional and their effect was very little compared with his main traditional method. According to Sai Baba's traditions, the disciple or devotee that comes to the feet of the Guru in complete surrender has to be no doubt pure, chaste, and virtuous. But he need not necessarily go on with any active practice of japa or meditation. On the other hand, japa, meditation, or any other intellectual process which carries with it the consciousness and assertion, I am doing this, is a handicap. All sense of the devotees or disciples, ahankara, ego, or little sense has to be wiped out, swept out of the memory and mind, as it is an obstruction to the Guru's task. The Guru does not teach, he radiates influence. That influence is poured in and absorbed with full benefit by the soul, which has completely surrendered itself, blotting out the self, but is obstructed by the exercise of intelligence by reliance on self exertion and by every species of self consciousness and self assertion. This great truth all observant persons visiting Sai Baba would have noticed or learnt. Sai Baba's words to some devotees were, "Be by me and keep quiet, I will do the rest," that is, secretly or invisibly. Of course, faith in him is a prerequisite, but one had merely to see him and stay by him a while and at once was endowed with faith. Baba gave experience to each devotee, experience of Baba's vast powers of his looking into the heart, into the distant regions of space and time, past or future and there infused faith. One had not merely to swallow everything on trust, the solid benefit, temporal or spiritual, reaped by the devotee and his feeling that he is under the eye and power of Baba, always wherever he may go or whatever he may do, give him an ineradicable basis for his further spiritual and temporal guidance. Baba's is the power that controls this world's goods and our fate here and now. Thus, our experience and fate in the future in this world, and many unseen worlds unseen at present. So, the duty of a devotee or an aspirant is only to keep himself fit for his Guru's grace, that is, chaste, pure, simple, and virtuous, and to look trustfully and sincerely to raise him to various experiences higher and higher in range, till at last he is taken to the distant goal, whatever that might be. One step enough for me is the proper attitude now. He need not take trouble to decide complicated metaphysical and philosophical problems about ultimate destiny. He is yet ill prepared to solve them. The Guru will lift him, endow him with higher powers, vaster knowledge, and increasing realization of truth, and the end is safe in the Guru's hands. All this was not uttered by Sai Baba at one breath to me or within my hearing, but the various hints I got from his example and dealings with many, and his occasional words, when put together, amount to this. And common sense points in the same direction. In my opinion, mere talk of Viveka and Vairagya without power of knowing what there is to experience or enjoy and what the things are that one is to renounce is childish and leads to self-delusion and deluding others. It is bookish wisdom and not real, not one that can stand the strain of actual life. People talking merely of these without power to be really filled with them prove hypocrites. When Baba said, "I am in each dog, pig, and cat," he was feeling himself to be inside the cats, etc., in question, and could state that they felt and what treatment they got. But others say it because it is found in the Gita, etc., and they believe it to be true. But in point of feeling and realization, they say what they do not feel. This leads to hypocrisy. Baba's real nature and greatness are seen from an incident known to me. I realized that Baba was God from the devotee's point of view, and yet a man seen in the flesh and with limitations to which an individual embodied soul is subject. The two coexist and are both true, each in its way. But my friends, that is, some of the devotees at Shirdi, did not agree with me or relish this view of mine. They once talked of 6 crores of islanders in Dwaraka at Sri Krishna's time, and I then disputed that estimate of the population as now we are about 33 crores in all in India, and India is so overpopulated that we have to tread on each other's heels. Then they asked me if I would agree to abide by Baba's decision on this matter. I agreed. We all went to Baba. Madhav Rao and other devotees asked Baba, "Baba, are the Puranas true?" Sai Baba, "Yes, true." Devotees, "What about Rama and Krishna?" Sai Baba, "They were great souls, gods they were, avatars." Devotee, This Narki will not accept all that. He says you are not God. Sai Baba, what he says is true, but I am your father and you should not speak like that. You have to get your benefit and everything from me. Sai Baba thus admitted his limitation. He was God, no doubt, in the experience of the devotee. But because the devotee felt that Sai Baba did not assert himself to be in fact nothing but God, he did not draw logical corollaries from it, nor use that position to help himself to the wealth, etc., of the devotees. Sai Baba did not use the fact of his devotees viewing him as God to declare for antinomianism, that is, setting himself up as above law. On the other hand, Sai Baba never disobeyed either the moral law or the law as it prevails in the country. He was never indecent in dress or behavior and was very reserved with women. Sai Baba's moods. No doubt, in certain ecstatic moods, he said, and I heard this myself, Main Allah hoon, I am God. But this was once in a way. His usual, almost invariable role was that of a devotee of God entrusted with vast powers to carry out what the fakir, God directs. Allah Malik, God is the master. Allah bhale karega, God will bless, were constantly on his lips. Also, I am God's slave. I remember God, etc. Baba and the sex question. Baba's was Ashkalikha Brahmacharya, and his glittering eyes spoke it out. He kept women at a distance. During the day, a very few women were allowed to massage his legs, and that only up to the knee. He was always clad and never indecently exposed himself. Baba's virtues. He was impartial and just. I have seen rich and highly placed persons going to him, being practically ignored by him, as he saw through the outside into the real nature or the heart of the person approaching him. I have also seen him pay great regard to and speak enthusiastically of some poor man that came to him saying, he has much money, Pika, that is, much of punya accumulated. Stern justice. A saint should not be judged by the character of those that gather around him. Prostitutes, women hunters, avaricious people, and sinners of various sorts came to him with a view mostly to gain material advantage. But when they failed to take advantage of his presence to improve themselves but fell into sins, he let them suffer. His justice was severe. You have to cut your own child if it falls around the womb, he said. Baba's boldness was based on foreknowledge or forevision. Baba was bold in his dealings with persons with the forces of diseases, etc., unknown to us but evidently well known to him. He occasionally infused faith in his devotees by such bold defiance of sanitary precautions. I will mention some instances known to me. Baba used to get sweet meat from a halwai for Naivedya. One day in 1916, he lay a corpse, a plague-stricken corpse. Plague was raging at Shirdi. Baba asked me to go and get the sweet meat from his shop. I went and told the wife, who was weeping, of Baba's order. She pointed to the corpse and said that I might take the sweetmeat from the almirah. I took it, trembling with the fear that by this I might catch the infection and others too. That was given as Naivedya. Baba told me, you think you will live if you are away from Shirdi and that you would die if you stay at Shirdi? That is not so. Whosoever is to be struck will be struck. Whosoever is to die will die. Whosoever is to be caressed will be caressed. He encouraged me similarly when cholera raged in Shirdi. He had lepers around him who massaged his legs. One of them got cured, but Baba made a leper take the udi and gave it as prasad to the devotees. The udi is put into the mouth of sick people, and the leper gave it to all by Baba's order. Yet No harm has resulted so far as I know. Shri Satchidanand Sadguru Sainath Maharaj Ki Jai.